Welcome to Love and Speak the Truth, a podcast with Sister B and friends. It might get messy, sacred to secular. Don't judge. All voices will be heard here. So listen up. We're going to explore the human experience through the lens of wisdom sharing and faith, with a worldview that might shock you, move you, even downright inspire you. Hello. It is a really great privilege to greet my sister from across the pond, all the way from Cambridge. Today we'll be immersed in an accent of historic connection, which will be a delight to listen and learn from her experience and her wisdom. I welcome my sister from the same mother, who is a member of the Congregation of Jesus, Gemma Simmons. So welcome, my good sister, Gemma. I am so glad that you're here. We are IBVMCJ, but we're really just one now, aren't we? And I'm so glad to have you.
Too right.
I'm glad to see you. You're there in Cambridge, and you are taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down in conversation with me for this podcast, Love and Speak the Truth. And I'm sure you're doing it out of love because you have more than enough to do to keep you busy. So I just want to welcome you. I just want you to know I so much appreciate your adding your unique and beautiful voice to this conversation. You know, I'm going to really try to talk to you about the relevance of religious life today and some of the great issues that we're dealing with and more. But wherever the conversation leads is where we'll go. So as we begin, just perhaps tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how your upbringing or how your life today shapes who you are.
I'll do that. So I'm the daughter of a Welsh Protestant father and a French Catholic mother who met in the ruins of Berlin in 1945. My father came in with the British Army. My mother came in with the Free French Army, and the rest is history. And when eventually they got back to London, after my brothers and sisters were born, I'm the baby of the family, they settled in Hampstead in North London, where the CJs, who were, of course, then IBVM, the Mary Ward sisters, had a house in London since the 1860s. And the local convent primary school was where my siblings and I went. And I was sent there when I was 3.5. So I've actually had 4.5 years of my entire life out of the Mary Ward context, not within the institute. And that house, that school, was always known to everyone as Happy Hampstead. And it really was. It was an immensely happy house, quite full of quite eccentric people in some ways. The sisters were very much their own women. And I think that's what I really noticed as a little girl and growing up, that they were kind of people first and nuns second, if you know what I mean. They really were such characters, and they were wonderfully kind and wonderfully free. You really had a sense. Of course, I didn't understand this till I was much older, but really free minds and free hearts, and women who were just giving everything of themselves to God and to those they cared for in God's name. And very, very early on, I had a sense of wanting to be a sister, of wanting to give my life to God. I was 4 years old when that happened. So, I wanted to go out and be a missionary in Africa.
At 4 years old?
At 4 years old, yeah, Sister Joanna, who looked after the reception class, she was longing to go out in the African missions. So we had this system for collecting money for the missions. And my mother said she'd given me so much money for this cause that she reckoned she'd baptized half the subcontinent of Africa, And I was actually a very naughty little girl. I'm afraid my big sister was the good girl and I was the bad girl. But
Mm.
despite all the naughtiness, there was such an atmosphere of very warm and inclusive and loving prayer in that house that just kind of rubbed off on you somehow.
Mhm.
And I was there till the age of 11 and then was sent off to our boarding school in the West Country in Shaftesbury. That was a less happy experience, I have to say, for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
And I got in terrible trouble. I was always in trouble
Mm.
with the prefects, with the nuns, with the teachers. And I used to run away and hide because everybody was always looking for me to get me into trouble or to put me in detention. And the place I learnt to go and hide was the chapel because nobody would ever imagine I would be in there. So they would never look for me. I just got used to kind of tucking myself in a little corner of the chapel and talking to God and talking to Our Lady and saying how unfair it all was and how dreadful it all was and how I
Mm.
wanted to go home.
Mhm.
And just got used to talking to God as one friend with another, as
Mm.
Ignatius says.
Yes, yes. It's not unusual that a preteen or a teen would get into a lot of trouble in their developmental years, though, isn't it? We know that now.
Ah, I surely do. And I got into a shed load of trouble.
Yeah,
But I always had a sense of God as my friend, as God as my defender, and as God who understood what I was really about,
yeah,
not didn't get distracted by all the nonsense, you know.
yeah. Yes, yes. And then you mentioned Mary Ward. It's all as Mary Ward women ourselves. I think that I don't know how many people in the world today would know who Mary Ward is for us. Maybe you could tell us about a Mary Ward experience that you have in that context of being in the schools where the sisters were all steeped in her spirituality.
Well, again, you know, we're talking around the time of the council because I first went to a Mary Ward school in 1960, so you know, just before the council. I suppose these are things that I've thought about as an adult looking back.
Yes.
I think what I mostly took on board from the sisters was freedom, a really deep sense of freedom. These were very vivid characters who were their own women.
Mhm.
There was one sister who I was very fond of as a small child, and we remained huge friends always until she died. And she had been a widow in World War II. She had married the great love of her life. And after 2 years of blissfully happy marriage, he was killed. And
Mhm.
she never really got over that, I think. There was always a huge sadness somewhere in there. But, you know, we all thought, we knew she was a widow, and we all thought it was terribly romantic that this sister had been married and then she'd become a sister, you know.
Mhm.
And she'd had a great struggle to get her family to accept that she wanted to be a nun and what have you. There was this aura about her that was about be yourself, be who you are. And
Mhm.
we know that there's a thing that Mary Ward said to her sisters. It was a really important thing to her that we should be such as we appear and
Mhm.
appear such as we are.
Yeah.
Kind of you see is what you get, you know.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
I felt that with these sisters, that's really what I saw was what I got.
Mhm.
And I liked what I saw. I saw women who, in the best sense of the word, women who didn't give a damn. You know, they just were themselves. They just got on with being who they were.
Mhm.
That appealed to me as a character because I was always doing that anyway. And so that although they didn't talk a great deal, they didn't say, well, we're doing this because Mary Ward did it. They'd kind of absorbed it, that freedom of spirit and that largeness of heart
Mhm.
that characterized Mary Ward.
I can resonate with that completely because I think one of the things I found myself when I started relationships with sisters in my high school, I found that they were really full of joy, and they loved what they were doing in our school. They loved us as kids. And there's a way where they didn't necessarily talk about it, but they were examples of love. They were
Mhm.
examples of goodness. Yeah, I think I resonate with what you say because I saw the same sense of joy and freedom and loving compassion. I went to school in a time where the issues, and I think they still exist, the issues of race and racism in our culture dominated
Uh-huh.
many, if not all, institutions and schools. Certainly suffered with allowing desegregation, and we're talking about the 70s, right? I wonder if you could talk about a little bit, share something about the relevance of religious life today. I know you're teaching and you're mentoring women and men in your university there. But what are some of the great issues facing religious today in the context of the issues of the world?
Okay. So just to say that, to sharpen up a bit on that background, here in Cambridge, I work with the Margaret Beaufort Institute of Theology. Margaret Beaufort was one of the founders of the University of Cambridge. She was the grandmother of Henry VIII, for those of you who are history buffs, and a great patron of learning, a great woman of learning. And um, I am director here of the Religious Life Institute, which is a national institute of research into religious life for both men and women, both Catholic and Anglican, as it happens. And, the Second Vatican Council teaches us that the primary vocation of every single baptized Christian is to share in the threefold ministry of Jesus Christ as prophet, priest, and king. And therefore, that there's got to be something about the way we live our Christian life that is prophetic, that proclaims God's presence in the world, God's sovereignty over the world, and says, God and the things of God and the righteousness of God are more important than any other criteria or categories of value that we might think up. And we all share in the priesthood of all believers, and the Latin word for priest is pontifex, which actually means a bridge builder. So that somehow within the life and the vocation of every baptized Christian is to be a bridge builder, but in any situation where people are divided from one another or fragmented in some way from one another. And then, we share in the proclamation of and the values of the kingdom, not the kingdom of this world, but the kingdom of God. And St. Paul, in one of his letters, said, if anyone is in Christ, they're a new creation, for there is neither Jew nor Greek, nor slave nor free, nor male nor female, for we are all one in Christ. And if you take those categories, those opposing categories that Paul talks about, Jew and Greek, slave and free, male and female, they were the three primary categories of social distinction, of social division, differentiation in the ancient world. And so Paul is saying something incredibly radical there. He's saying none of those distinctions matter. None of them have any traction anymore, because what matters is that we're one in Christ. And I see religious life as really embodying that, The vows that we take, the vow of poverty and chastity and obedience, they're not primarily a form of discipline or privation. They're a choice for freedom. So to take a vow of poverty. I mean, clearly, I'm just back. I've been traveling in Zimbabwe in the last month, and there is no way that I am as poor as many of the people that I saw in Zimbabwe, and I don't pretend to be. But what I'm saying is, I am choosing to live a life that does not have consumption as a primary goal, a primary value. I'm letting go of that. I want to be free of that. And so I buy my clothes in Goodwill stores, or I, eat cheap food, or I, live as simply as I can. And that's both out of solidarity with those who don't have any choice about that. But it's also saying, I don't want to be judged by what I own or what I've got or what I aspire to. And uh, I don't want to be judged by what I consume. Consumption is not the primary value of my life. And we so often, I notice in our newspapers, whenever they talk about someone, they say, like Gemma Simmons in her £250,000 house. And I think, what kind of description is that of a human being? Who cares how much your house cost? That's not the most important thing about you. Uh, let's have a system of value that values people for something other than house cost, or what their clothes cost, or what car they drive, or whatever. So I think religious life has got a real relevance in that sense, to confront a world that is completely constructed around consumption, values people according to consumer criteria.
And there's a subliminal message given through all the ads and all
Yeah.
the bombardment of what you need to have in order to be happy or holy or peaceful and calm or well received.
You only matter if you've got,
Yeah.
and even like the words in advertising, like, must have.
Yes.
Like, why must I have it? I don't need it. I don't have it, must have it, and I don't want it. And I think that was something that spoke to me very powerfully as a young person. I just had this sense that these things were not important as criteria of value, really. And in the same way, all Christians are called to love. All human beings are wired for love. Let's face it. There's a sense in which, when you get married, I mean, the actual, the formula of marriage talks about, forsaking all others for this person. I choose you exclusively forever to be my life partner. And that's just a miracle. That's a wonderful thing. When it's a scary thing to say to someone else, you're going to be the one for me for the rest of my life. And it's wonderful. And religious choose not to make those kind of commitments. But what they choose to do is to make, if you like, a commitment to inclusive loving, loving everyone and anyone who comes across their path, and especially, people who are not loved, people who are abandoned and unloved. And again, I go back to my primary school, to Happy Hampstead. We had this just endless stream of homeless men who used to come to the back door for a cup of tea and a sandwich. And there were two wonderful sisters, Sister Stephen and Sister Callista, Stevie and Callista. They were tiny little pint-sized sisters and little round faces, and they were just the most gorgeous human beings. And they lived and worked in the kitchen, and they looked after these men. And every once in a while, one of these men would die, in the winter, and would often be found dead by the police on a sidewalk somewhere, or, in the streets. And they would have a little note in their pocket somewhere just saying, Sister Callista, Convent, Hampstead. And that was like their next of kin, And over and over again, the police would come to say, we found this homeless man and he's died and he's had your name in his pocket. And Stevie or Callista or the sisters would go to their funeral and they would be the only family that were there. And
Mhm.
even as kids, we knew this. And again, I can remember thinking, what would it be like to be someone else's kin, to be kin to everyone we see,
Mhm.
to be there for them,
Mhm.
whoever they are.
Yes, I resonate with with that thinking, to be available,
Yeah,
to love in a way that is not possessive. Huh?
yeah, yeah.
And I resonate with the whole notion of moving away from what I want to what we need.
Hmm.
It makes so much sense. I love the way, Gemma, I love the way you articulate, maybe because you're a teacher and you are immersed in the language of faith and the practical way we serve that faith.
Yeah.
And so your language is eloquent. I had to write some of the things down that you said. I what I'm connecting with here is that our religious life is not a focus on ourselves, but it's an outward focus. I love the image of being bridge builders, even in our love making. And I think there's a way where something happens when you don't when you belong, but you don't feel that you are owned by things
Yeah.
or even institutions.
Uh-huh.
I think this is one of the things that Pope Francis has been trying to um, spell out for us, that the
Sure.
law is not for rails to keep us in, but the law of the faith is for freeing us to be more human, inclusive, huh?
Yeah, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, who on whom our own way of life is very much modelled. He talks about the law of love written on the heart.
Mm. Yeah,
I think it's a lovely expression, the law of love written on the heart.
yeah.
Um, you know, again to connect with Pope Francis, the third of the vows that are taken by sisters like ourselves and many religious brothers too is obedience. And I've got both. Well, all my brothers were in the military, and one in the navy, two in the navy, one in the army. And one of the one of the navy guys, he keeps saying to me, "Hey, I thought you took a vow of obedience. I thought that means you've got to do what you're told, and you never do what you're told. How come that? How does that work?" And I said to him, "Look, the Latin root of the word obedience is ob audire, and that in Latin means to listen attentively,
Yes.
to listen attentively. And attentive listening, is about listening for the voice of the Spirit
Mhm.
as the Holy Spirit speaks in the events in our world, like what am I hearing right now, let's say, in the various conflicts around the world? Or what am I hearing in the Black Lives Matter movement or in the Me Too movement
Mhm.
or the kids who are out on our streets protesting about climate, threat? What am I hearing that God is saying to us?
Yes. Yeah.
But also, what am I hearing in the synod that's happening
Yes.
in church right now? Or what am I hearing, when people are trying to explore gender and sexuality and all these really complicated questions? I've taken a vow to be attentive, to listen attentively to all of this so that I can try to bring about God's kingdom in this world, to do God's will in the world.
Yes. Yes.
And therefore, I have to be the kind of person who spends time listening to people, listening to young people, old people, atheists, uh, we've got a whole load of our students protesting at the moment because of the war in Gaza.
Mhm.
I've got to go and listen to what they're saying.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what's at the heart. So, obedience is not just about, doing what you're told, although I'm sure that's quite useful sometimes,
Yes.
but it's about really being attentive to what the Spirit of God is saying in the signs of the times.
Yes. Yes. I hear you. One of the attractions for um entering into this ministry of uh podcasting, if you will, love and speak the truth, is to listen to the voices, the prophetic voices like your own, and also the ordinary ones, the ones who are trying to sort out the various wisdoms that they've come in contact with in their own lives. Uh, I think that listening is a real ministry that we need to somehow embrace because it's as you said, we are called to listen. You
Yeah.
know, I don't understand. I think in U.S. culture anyway, we have become so very much self-centered. We're a very generous society, but we're also a very egocentric and self-centered people. And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
even more so now that immigrants, migrants are trying to move to a place where they can find a better life, we're feeling threatened by the movement. That's
Yes.
a very natural movement, and the Pope invites us, to listen to that. And the American Church, unfortunately, we don't heed very well to what the Pope is inviting us to, challenging us to, because we're afraid. I don't know if it's because we're afraid, but certainly that resonates with the kinds of things that you're saying we as religious are called to do, to model, and to be present to, huh?
Yeah. And I think we're modeling, you know, this is how to be more human.
Mhm,
Being a sister, being a religious, it
mhm,
doesn't make you less human. The
mhm,
ideal is it should make you more
mhm.
as human as you can possibly be.
Yes.
you know, and to live life to the full, and that therefore also means to create spaces where other people can live life to the full.
Exactly.
People who maybe didn't get so many chances, people who've come from contexts where, however clever they are, however hard they try, however much effort they make, they're never going to live a full life because the system doesn't permit it,
That's right.
and we're there to be there for them, you
Yes,
know?
yes, yes. Throughout history, I think the backbone of the church, the workhorses of the church are the religious women first,
Ah,
and then men.
oh, sure.
Yeah, it fell on our shoulders of the founders. It fell on the shoulders of those who came after them to bring the faith to where the needs are. I think it's amazing that right now we're at a point in religious life, at least in the US, and I'm sure you experience the same thing in Britain, all over the UK, all over Europe, where religious men and women are diminishing in numbers.
Yeah.
We are not diminishing in resources. We are some of the most educated people in the world. But how to make our influence felt is sometimes the challenge, isn't it? And
I
I
think I
Yeah.
think it is. Yeah. I think it is. And I think there's been a big shift, Brenda, because, there was a time, as you say, where we were the backbone of the workforce. We were the workhorses that were running the institutions. And now, largely thanks to the religious, I mean, in my country, it was the religious who started up hospitals.
Yes, here
It was
too.
the religious who started up the education system. It was the religious who started up the social care system in this country. And so, historically, we have the religious to thank for the whole system of social care
Mhm.
from cradle to grave. Well, now governments have taken that over. That's being taken over by secular authorities. So we find ourselves no longer running large institutions. And, I'm not sorry about that, because our former institutions are in very good lay hands.
Mhm.
I think where we are is that many, many people are what we call money rich and time poor,
Mhm.
or people don't have the time and the space to be listened to be paid attention to. And I think as religious are getting older, the one thing they do have more than they used to is time.
Mhm.
And, we are still able, until our dying breath, I think,
Yes.
to people who pay attention to others
Yes.
and who are alongside others in both great ways and small.
Yes.
Um, we have a sister, she's 97 now, and she is in elder care. But, prior to that, she was a great one for getting on the bus and, traveling across London. We lived in community together then. And, I get on a bus, I put my head down, maybe I get a book out or something, but otherwise I'm thinking my thoughts. I start my journey, I finish my journey. I don't say a word to anybody.
Yes.
She gets on a bus, and by the time she gets off the bus, she's had the life story of half her fellow passengers. She knows what they're all going to have for dinner tonight. She knows the ones who are going to hospital and what's wrong with them, and the ones who've got troubles with their daughter-in-law or their grandchildren or their husband or wife. She knows the name of the bus driver. I mean, she's just extraordinary.
Mhm.
And people just tell her stuff.
Mhm.
And they tell her because she pays attention. She's
Mhm.
interested.
Mhm.
She's
Mhm.
there for them. And,
Mhm.
she was doing this right up into her late 80s.
Mhm.
She just had that measure of attention. And
Mhm.
I still think we can do an awful lot for people just by paying them attention.
Right. Yes. Yes. To find the value in um, knowing someone else who is stranger as neighbor, who
Yeah.
is who is as stranger another human being beside
Yeah.
us, that making that the focus,
Sure.
and not that the focus becomes you're a stranger and someone to be feared, but as
Yeah.
you said, sharing my attention, saying you matter, you're
Yeah.
here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a lovely experience of that during lockdown. So the lockdown was really, really fierce here. And, for a good long while we couldn't go out of our houses basically.
Mhm.
And then when things started loosening up just a tiny bit, you were allowed back on trains and on public transport if you wore a mask and all of that.
Right.
And I had to go to London. So I got on a train, I traveled to London, and I'd, as usual, always running, behind. So I hadn't had any breakfast that day. And I was really thirsty when I got to London. I thought, I'm going to get myself a cup of coffee before I move on with my journey. And I went to this one coffee outlet. And there was this young guy in there who was behind the bar, this barista. And I ordered my coffee and I looked at his name label and I noticed he had a Hispanic name. And
Mhm.
I was a Spanish teacher at one point in my life and I speak Spanish. So I said to him in Spanish, "Are you Spanish?" "Oh, yeah," he said, "I am. Are you?" And I said, "Well, no." He said, "Well, wow, you speak amazing Spanish." And we had a kind of chat. And I said, "Listen, what are you doing here? I mean, did you get stuck behind here in England? Where's your family? Are you with them? Are you on your own?" And he started to talk about how he did get stuck behind here by the lockdown and he had to stay and his family are all in Madrid and he was really worried and kind of you could see this boy was really lonely and was thrilled to speak his own language. And at the end, he gave me my coffee and he gave me a cake.
Mhm.
And I said, I didn't order a cake. And he said, no, no, you can have that as a gift. And I said, what? You're giving free cake away today in your shop? And he said, no, but you are the only person in 3 days who has bothered to ask me how I am.
Ah,
You can have a cake for that, you
yeah.
know. And just the loneliness of this boy.
Mm,
And he was just so touched that someone had asked about his name and asked about his family and was he okay and
mhm.
showed him just a little bit of human warmth, you know.
Mm, mm, mm.
And I didn't do that so as to get free cake. I
No.
did it because, I recognized him as a human being. And honest to God, that's all it takes.
Yes, yes. And you know something when you mentioned that, that sometimes that going back to your paying attention, um,
Yeah,
is sometimes the most profound thing that you can do in the moment. You know, you
yeah,
can't elect the president you want. You can't have the policy you want. You don't have the amount of funds that you need, but in the moment, the most amazing thing you can do in someone's life is notice them,
yeah, yeah,
recognize them, right?
yeah,
Listen,
yeah.
I want to come back to you're a linguist, aren't you? You're a linguist.
I am. Yeah.
And
Yes, I am.
you and how many languages? And say them in the languages that you tell me them in the languages that you speak.
Okay, so I'm French English bilingual from birth. And I have to say that when I spoke French before I spoke English, so when I burn myself in the kitchen, the rude words that come out are always French. And because my mum was the only member of her family who spoke any English. So my French family, by and large, don't speak English. And we had my grandma living with us half the year, and the only language she understood was French. So we had to speak French, among ourselves.
Mhm,
Um, and I learned German. My parents were German speakers as well. They met in Germany and lived in Germany for quite a while. And
mhm,
I was taught Latin brilliantly at school, really brilliantly. So that's kind of the scaffolding for the building of languages. So
yes,
that's really the foundation of most of my languages. So I've got um, French and English and German and Latin. Um, I learnt Spanish when I went to university.
mm,
I went out to be a missionary in Brazil and had to learn Portuguese immediately. Nobody spoke any English where I was
uh,
or any other language. But I was working with kids on the streets
mhm,
and they taught me. And they used to teach me. I would ask, how do you say this? And they'd teach me the word. And I'd say, is that word okay? Can I say it back in the convent? Oh, yes, Auntie, you can say that. And I'd go back in the convent and use this word. And everybody would go crazy because I'd used some terribly rude word.
mhm,
And the kids thought this was so funny to teach rude words to the sister.
mhm,
And um, I met not long ago, I was working in Tanzania and I met Cardinal Braz de Aviz. He is the cardinal prefect. He's in charge of the department in the Vatican that looks after religious orders, sisters and brothers and co. And
so,
he's Brazilian. So I spoke to him in Brazilian and he said, My God, where did you get that accent from? I've never heard anything like it. You sound as if you come from the back streets of Rio. And I say, I do come from the back streets of Rio. And so I gather I've learned a kind of really backstreets accent in Portuguese.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so as well as Latin, I've got Greek. My parents actually spoke modern Greek because they were posted out there. My sister was born in Greece, but I've
Okay.
got
Jesus, what
just
else?
now. I've just got no. Mine is ancient Greek to be able to read the New Testament, and I don't read it very well, I have to say.
Hmm.
And I understand Romanian pretty well. I've tried to learn Romanian, but I haven't had much time to spend on that. So what I can say is very limited, but I do understand it because it's quite close to Italian, which I also speak,
Gee.
and Spanish. So they're mostly the Latin languages, and really, honestly, Brenda, it sounds quite impressive, but it's just different combinations of the same thing.
Hmm.
It's basically like a knitting pattern. There's only two stitches, plain and purl,
Hmm.
and just do them in different combinations, you know?
But you have to have a brain that understands the combination.
I
Yeah.
suppose, yeah. And you have to have an ear that can hear
Yes.
how things change. I mean, mostly you can make a pretty educated guess. Mind you, I when I first went to Portuguese to Brazil, I kept seeing these big notices on the streets saying what I now know is the Portuguese word borracho, but I read it as the Spanish word borracho, and borracho in Spanish means drunk.
Hmm.
And una borrachera means, to get really like drunk as a skunk. And I kept thinking, why are they advertising this? Why are the big notices basically saying, come and get drunk here?
Hmm.
And eventually I asked somebody and they laughed and said, no, no, in Portuguese, borracho means rubber. And it's a tire shop. It's where you go to get your
Um,
tires fixed.
mhm.
And I kept thinking it was advertising for kind of drunken orgies of some sort, you know?
Yeah.
So sometimes the connection doesn't always work
Right,
perfectly, you
right.
know?
But I think that's the thing of language, though. It makes a connection, and sometimes it levels the playing field, doesn't it? Because
Sure.
if you go to a new place, I know this I'm speaking probably more as an American, and everybody is supposed to speak English, and they're supposed to understand you. But when you have languages, it opens the door of understanding in a way that not knowing does not. It's
Yeah.
sort of isolating, but at the same time, if you go into a place and there are people there who probably have less means, but they have the language and you don't, there's a way that you can create a connection to ask, and how do you say, and how do you
Yeah.
do, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, I learned that in my own travels and my inability to take in languages at any level. Mostly everything is beginning and it stays at the beginning and it never comes to an end.
Well, the only other thing is that, of course, it can give people, hospitality is so important. And
Mm.
if you don't speak the language, in a sense, people are more likely to 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 offer hospitality because they
Mhm.
realize you're struggling, you know. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's the building of a bridge,
Yes,
and even the inability to do something
yes,
is a building of a
yeah,
bridge. You
exactly, exactly.
know.
Yeah, listen, we before I think I could talk to you for another 2 hours, but we are limited in time. Most of the audience who will be listening into our conversation in this Love and Speak the Truth podcast won't really know much about this area, but I want to hear you share a little bit on this uh, Mary Ward reunion that we're having as an institute, the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Congregation of Jesus. We are finally, and all through history, making that leap of faith that will make us all one institute, as
Amen.
Mary Ward wanted. And our being one today means so much to me as a person now recognizing how much I belong to the world. We're a global society. And I think our reunion, our becoming one, our being one will example that we can be human, we can be sisters and brothers and people of faith from across borders in ways that are enriching
Sure.
and loving and
Sure.
complete. So just shed a little light on your feeling about that whole being one institute.
Oh, it's something I've been praying for ever since I was, really young. And, it was an accident of history that we were separated into two separate juridical bodies. We didn't begin like that. We didn't think ourselves as two separate juridical bodies. It happened by an accident of history, really.
Mhm.
And there is plenty of evidence, historical evidence, that, even in the late 19th century, we thought of ourselves as one body, as the same. But, differences grew up and things happened that, split us off into different jurisdictions. And Mary Ward, there's a lovely thing when she was dying, and it was during the English Civil War, and her sisters had all been dispersed around the place, and she'd been separated from many of them. And as she lay dying, one of her friends leant over her and said, "We are all here." And Mary's response was, "I would that we were. I wish we
Mm,
were all together." So, that was her kind of dying wish. And when I was a novice, already, my novice director and the Loretto, the IBVM novice director in England, they were great friends, and they decided to do as much as they could with the novices together. So I was uh, Sister Jen and Sister Annie, her twin sister, Bromham, IBVM, they were novices at the same time as me and Sister Jane Livesey. And we did all sorts of stuff together. So
mhm,
from the very beginning, we thought of this as something we really wanted to
mhm,
do as much together as we possibly could.
mhm,
And so as time went on, I went and visited houses of your institute. Where I learnt Spanish first was in Loreto houses in Spain. I
mm,
knew your sisters, I knew my own.
mm,
And I've had a fabulous welcome from the sisters in the States and from the sisters in Kenya and in Canada and in Australia. I kind of felt as if I was a member of the province there.
mm,
And when I became the novice director myself, I made sure that my novices and your novices, we had all the classes together. So
mm,
it just felt more and more ridiculous that we had the same mother. And I remember going to Kenya to do some work, and the sister who was in charge at the time, she introduced me to the others. We hadn't met each other. This is Gemma. She's from the Congregation of Jesus, and she's a sort of cousin.
mm.
What is that?
Yes,
So I said, listen,
yes.
here in Africa, you know, what do you call the the daughter of your mother?
Mhm,
And she's my sister. I said, okay. So in religious life, from the point of view of the founding of your congregation, who was your mother? Who was the founder of the congregation? She said, Mary Ward. And I said, okay. And who was the founder of my congregation? And she said, Mary Ward.
mhm,
So I said, so we've got the same mother, right?
mhm.
And she said, huh? I said, okay, does that make me your cousin? She said, oh, no,
Ah,
it makes you my sister. I said, okay, I never want to hear that C word again,
huh?
okay? I
Lesson
only
learned.
want to I only want the S word, And
Lesson
so,
learned.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, we made a commitment a couple of years ago as the two institutes never to do anything separately if we could possibly do it together.
Mhm,
And I think that was such a great decision. And I so look forward to the day when we really do become one.
yes.
I think we will not lose our particularity. I think that will always be there. There will be different cultures, there will be different traditions, and that's an enrichment.
Mhm,
We're not gonna lose those, we're going to gain,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
I think there will have to be adaptation, as there always is when people come together.
Right.
It's like 2 families coming together,
Right.
there has to be adaptation. But I think it will be enrichment, not impoverishment.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there we go.
Yes. And I love that. And it sums it up for me very, very well. And I think what I would highlight in some of that is the fact that first we become friends. We
Yeah, absolutely.
we become close to one another with the idea that we belong to each other. Mm. And
Absolutely.
that makes a lot of sense to just get to know each other and as sisters, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to hang out and also to do things together. I mean, we have had joint, um, ministries, we've had joint missions together, and that's been a real enrichment. So,
Mhm.
um, here's hoping it happens soon,
Okay.
and
All right.
here's hoping we'll both be at the party, you and me, Brenda.
Okay. All right. So as we come to an end in our conversation that I'm so grateful
So
for,
grateful.
I just want one more question that is just a simple phrase, if you will. What is your one truth that has stayed with you for most of your life? Just your one truth, anything at all, relating to anything at all, your one truth that's guided you or been with you for a good part of your life.
That's a massive question, Brenda.
Mhm.
I think, if you learn to love yourself, you'll learn to love others. And if you can't love yourself, you will never adequately love anyone else.
If you learn
So
to love,
do the
yes,
homework, learn to love yourself,
learn to love yourself. Awesome.
learn to love
Beautiful.
yourself. Yeah.
Gemma, this has been great, a wonderful conversation, a gift of your life in a few minutes to share with hopefully an audience that can appreciate. Even though we have great distance between us, we are very, very close together. So thank you so much and God bless you. And I can't wait to see you again in whatever meeting or occasion we will meet.
Amen, sister. So thank you, Brenda. It's been lovely talking to you, and God bless everyone who listens to this, huh?
Okay, God, good. Bye now. And now for the wrap up. You have just had a human experience from a spiritual being. We have so much to learn. So go forth to love and speak the truth. Ad majorem Dei gloriam. A couple of announcements. Don't forget to rate and follow us on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We are on Facebook at Love Speak Truth and visit our website at www.lovespeaktruth.org. For a few credits, when all is said and done, I give thanks and credit for sponsors, producers, and contributors who made this podcast possible. Mega shout out to IBVM Region Leadership, Megan Butel, Jennifer Schmitz, Carol Benaziak, Laurenti Wright for the keyboard music, the late Sister Maria Beer IBVM for her composition of the music Women Bearing Witness. It takes a village, folks. Thanks for listening to Love Speak Truth.